All right, we're back on. Welcome to Say It Loud, Random Slabs of Music History, the show where each week my guest and I talk about a different random piece of music history, and we listen to the tunes that made it happen. As I said, I'm glad to be back after a brief absence in my new time slot, so we're going to get a little bit more time to talk about a little bit more detail and play a little bit more music. And today, a special episode. I have a long-distance guest. My friend Tom Bowers back home has inspired this week's episode, so I'm going to be basically playing his playlist, adding a few details and maybe a couple of other songs, but we're going to say that Tom Bowers is my guest today, even though he's not here, and this week's episode is going to be Outlaw Country. Like I said, we've got a little bit more time, so I can move a little slower and we can listen to a few more songs. Now, so far, this program, I would say, has been decidedly uncountry. And this week's episode is Outlaw Country. We've got some similarities here. And so we've got a group of musicians who reference a common history, which seems to be a trend that is ran throughout all of these episodes so far. And we've got a group, loosely, I guess we could call them a group, that uses their music to create their own mythology in their songs and with their lifestyles. And it's also, like most of these I'm finding, which keeps on surprising me, that this is a group that is rather incestuous, meaning that many of them played together, they knew each other, they lived together, they cover the same songs, they have the same heroes, they cover each other's songs. For this particular episode, Outlaw Country, we're talking about a group that was hard living. Some of them were obscure while they were alive, some of them made it to the big time, a lot of similarities to the other groups that I've talked about so far. And this is a genre that, because of their own mythology, their own lifestyle, they run into some problems because of this. So they exclude some people, they exclude women, and there are some myths about actually who they exclude, what they do, and we're going to talk about that today. So there's no time for a full history of country music, but I'm just going to start with this outlaw idea. We'll give you a couple of the influences, go through some of the songs, and talk about some of the things that tie this kind of music to some of the stuff that, as I said earlier, is decidedly uncountry. So the history: before the Outlaws, there was the influence. So what exactly is outlaw country? And we'll just give you a definition that we're going to be refining throughout the program here. It's a group of musicians who became popular in the 60s and 70s. It's a reaction to performers who the Outlaws saw as softening the honky-tonk sound of early country performers, especially the stuff that was coming out of Nashville. So overproduced kind of music that they saw, and crossover pop country stars. So you get, possibly the title came maybe, and this could be part of the myth as well, from David Allan Coe, who we're going to talk about a little bit later, who is one of the more important outlaws, and according to my friend Tom, probably the biggest outlaw, right, of the group. He was in a motorcycle gang, the Outlaws Motorcycle Club, and the rumor is, the myth is, maybe the story is, that David Allan Coe actually attached the label to these guys from his days in the Outlaws Motorcycle Club. And what we have here is there's not a lot of things that hold all of these musicians together, because there's many of them, and some of them are still alive today. David Allan Coe is still alive today. A lot of these guys are still around. Some are still performing, but we get a lot of Texas performers who reject what they see as overproduced music coming out of Nashville. So I'm going to start with a few of the roots here to talk about how diverse this is. We're probably all thinking straight country. It's a little bit more diverse than that, and we're going to talk about that throughout the show today, where the actual roots are. But it starts coming out of this tradition of folk and blues from the early 20th century. So I'm going to start us with a song that really doesn't sound much like country at all, but it gets part of this trend going. This is one of the early country stars, and this maybe shows us how far country has came, especially when we get up into the 1990s and the 2000s, where we're going to eventually find ourselves today. So I'm going to start out with a Jimmy Rogers song, and you listen to this, and you're probably not going to be thinking of country music right away. This has got a much different sound, horns instead of guitars, not really any of the instrumentation that that we think of when we think about country music, but this is a guy who became pretty influential on another performer who became really influential for a lot of the people who came after him, and this is Jimmy Rogers. And so he was steeped in this Mississippi blues tradition. He is from Mississippi. And he starts a lot of the kind of myths with the content of his songs, but also he died young of tuberculosis when he was 30. He was a brakeman for the railroad, hard drinker, fighter, in trouble with the law, several of the themes that are going to come up again and again when we're talking about this today. And you'll hear it in this song, and pay attention to the lyrics. What are the kind of themes? Because a lot of this is a song from 1930 that I'm going to play, and a lot of this stuff carries through, and you can definitely hear how Hank Williams was very much influenced by this guy. So we're going to play a Jimmy Rogers song, Standing on the Corner, Blue Yodel number 9, and this was actually one of the first songs inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, and we're going to play the song. Here we go.
Standing on the corner, I didn't mean no harm. Along come a police, he took me by the arm. It was down in Memphis, corner of Beale and Main. He says, big boy, you'll have to tell me your name. I said, you'll find my name on the tail of my shirt. I'm a Tennessee hustler, I don't have to wait. Listen, all you rounders, you better leave my women alone. 'Cause I'll take my special and run all you rounders home. My good gal loves me, everybody knows. And she paid $100 cash just for me a suit of clothes. She come to the joint, a 44 in each hand. She said, stand aside all you women and men, 'cause I'm looking for my man. De-o-de-lee, de-o-de-lee.
All right, so there's Jimmy Rogers, and like I said, not exactly what we think of probably when we're thinking of country music. You hear horn and piano are the most prominent instruments that you hear. This is definitely a song that is probably different than a lot of the stuff that we're going to listen to, but this is a guy who's influential, and any Hank Williams fans out there can probably hear that influence. And you listen to the themes is one of the reasons that I played this song. Using guns, disliking the police, tough luck with women, fighting, all these sort of themes that we're going to keep on revisiting throughout the show. And like I said, he's highly influential and was recognized by the Country Music Hall of Fame, and a lot of performers will recognize him even if they don't really sound anything like him. But what Jimmy Rogers leads to is probably one of the biggest influences on country music, period, in America, Hank Williams. And so not only because his bloodline is going to carry us through the 1970s and 80s and all the way up through the 90s and the 2000s and now the 2010s, but because of his immense popularity, even though he wasn't really terrifyingly popular while he was alive and active. And also he solidifies the myth of country music. And this is the guy who really a lot of people think of when they think of country in America. Now, Hank Williams, he's originally from Alabama, and he learned to play, and this is another place where today it seems like there's a sort of dissociation that it's kind of that, rap and R&B would be black music, country music is white music. Well, these lines were much blurrier at this time. Jimmy Rogers played with several black musicians and was really traded on Mississippi blues type of sounds. Hank Williams also did this, so he's from Alabama, surrounded by black music. He learns how to play guitar actually from a black blues player, but he develops, and not just because he was one of the first people to become popular and was with the Grand Ole Opry and all sorts of these other things that made him famous, but his style really develops the quintessential honky-tonk kind of sound. And also he brings in some other themes on top of the stuff that Jimmy Rogers is covering. So he's obsessed with sin. He is obsessed with his own impending death. He is a hard-living man, so he's addicted to alcohol, opium, morphine, painkillers. He lost his wife. He lost gigs at radio stations. He was kicked out of the Grand Ole Opry for drunkenness. He performed erratic performances. People were too nervous basically to hire him because they had no idea what to expect, and he dies at age 29. But here's this, and I'm going to call it the quintessential honky-tonk sound. This is the themes all summed up, I think, this particular song, and this is one of Tom's songs here. Most of these songs will be Tom's, as I said, my long-distance guest here, Lost Highway from Hank Williams. And this song really brings a lot of all of his themes together. So here's a track from the 1940s when Hank was just beginning in his recording career, Lost Highway. We're going to listen to this, and we'll come back and talk about some of the themes that we see there.
I'm a rolling stone, all alone and lost, for a life of sin I have paid the cost. When I pass by, all the people say, just another guy on the lost highway. Just a deck of cards and a jug of wine, and a woman's lies makes a life like mine. Oh, the day we met, I went astray. I started rolling down that lost highway.
All right, there's Hank Williams from the 1940s, and the first thing that probably strikes you is how nice sounding this is, but you also hear that steel guitar in the background, which is actually a development out of blues players, but also comes from this is like one of the lost references, Hawaiian music, which was wildly popular in the United States in the 20s and 30s. That kind of twangy sound, which really is developing the quintessential classic sort of honky-tonk sound. And even though this is a lot different than the folks who come after him, Hank, as the myth grows around him, we kind of tend to forget that he's really playing some pretty pleasant songs, but also you hear the obsession with sin, the lost highway, warning songs, a lot of warning songs. And you can maybe think of this as a guy who is aware that he's heading down the wrong path and telling other people, don't head down this path, even though he's doing it himself, which is a theme that we're going to get to. And Hank he is very influential, but this is also part of a larger radio sound. And in the early 1950s, you get this country sound that actually begins to cross over, and you start to get a lot of pop success with these songs. And this is eventually, so Hank sort of paradoxically leads to the kind of sound that most of the outlaw guys are rejecting, even though they look back to Hank as one of their heroes. And I'll give you an example, a song that probably most of us have heard, and we're going to get a couple of women in here who are involved with this, but I'm going to start here with a woman who had massive crossover success, Patsy Cline, who was very influential too, but she's probably most influential for developing this kind of sound that the folks decided that they didn't like, the overproduced kind of a sound. But we'll hear some of the same kind of themes here. It's just like the blues, about being lovesick and rambling. She also died young in a plane crash when she was 30 years old. And we'll listen to Patsy Cline's Walking After Midnight from 1957. The time was the song was wildly popular, and this kind of sound was wildly popular. And it's not long after this that people start to reject this kind of sound. But this is a great tune from Patsy Cline, Walking After Midnight.
I go out walking after midnight, out in the moonlight, just like we used to do. I'm always walking after midnight, searching for you. I walk for miles along the highway. Well,
Patsy Cline from 1957. And all three of these songs that I played, you can hear a similar kind of vocal style. In the last two especially, you hear that steel guitar sound. So really a kind of sound had developed as honky tonk, and it wasn't really long after that it had crossover success, and we could play several bands that do this. But I want to get to the outlaw country. So you hear that, I'll call it a Nashville polish that was actually challenged by all of the rock and honky tonkers of the 50s, early rock and roll, and especially a little bit later, not too long after this is 57, you already get people who are from that era who are reacting against that. So somebody very influential, a legend from the era, probably somebody that we've all heard of, Johnny Cash, who also lived a rebel lifestyle, kind of contributing to the myth of the mythology of outlaw country. He was around, this is a guy who was around long enough to cover a Nine Inch Nails song, so you already start to see that we're getting pretty close to the present. Some of these folks have been around for a long time, living legends, as it were. I'm going to play a Johnny Cash song here, Sunday Morning Coming Down, and this is from 1970. I'm going to come back and we'll talk a little bit more about Johnny Cash himself, but we all have probably sort of know a little bit of something about him. But listen to this song and the themes again, and this is very obviously something that was picked up by a lot of the later outlaws that we're going to get to. So we're going to take one more step forward with Johnny Cash here, Sunday Morning Coming Down.
Well, I woke up Sunday morning with no way to hold my head. That didn't hurt. And the beer I had for breakfast wasn't bad, so I had one more for dessert. Then I fumbled in my closet through my clothes and found my cleanest dirty shirt. Then I washed my face and combed my hair and stumbled down the stairs to meet the day. I'd smoked my mind the night before with cigarettes and songs I'd been picking. But I lit my first and watched a small kid playing with a can that he was kicking. Then I walked across the street and caught the Sunday smell of someone's frying chicken. And Lord, it took me back to something that I lost somewhere, somehow along the way. On a Sunday morning sidewalk, Sunday that makes a body feel alone. And there's nothing short of dying that's half as lonesome as the sound of the sleeping city sidewalk. And Sunday morning coming down. In the park I saw a daddy with a laughing little girl that he was swinging. And I stopped beside a Sunday school and listened to the songs they were singing. Then I headed down the street, and somewhere far away a lonely bell was ringing. And it echoed through the canyons like a disappearing dreams of yesterday. On a Sunday morning sidewalk, I'm wishing, Lord, that I was stoned, 'cause there's something in a Sunday creeping city sidewalk, and Sunday morning coming down.
All right, there we have Johnny Cash. Now that's from 1970. I took quite a big jump ahead there, but Johnny Cash was around for a long time and he established a lot of these trends. That song, that particular song, and this is a good choice by Tom, Chris Christopherson was the songwriter, and this is Johnny Cash was never really afraid to court controversy, but he had his television show, 69, 70, and into 71. Johnny Cash had a television show, and he played this song, and he refused to change the lyrics, getting stoned. So he refused to change those lyrics, so that actually gives Chris Christopherson a boost as the songwriter, and gives Johnny Cash, I guess, sort of more of the same fame that he was acquiring for being controversial. And so we know probably a lot about Johnny Cash. He's addicted to amphetamines and pills, sort of abandoned his first wife and kids. He actually lived with Waylon Jennings. This is sort of more of that incestuous nature of all of these performers. So he lived with Waylon Jennings, who was another outlaw who was hooked on drugs. They were hooked on drugs together. So he also becomes this mega superstar. So this is where there is sort of ambivalence between some of these outlaws. Like I said, some of them don't really ever make it, and some of them become wildly, wildly famous. Johnny Cash is obviously one of those. And another trend that you find almost across the board with some of these guys, I mentioned Chris Christopherson, who a lot of us are probably familiar with his movie career. He's on TV. He has his own show. He actually ended up meeting the president, Nixon, and talking to him because Johnny Cash advocated prison reform. And I could have played, one of his more famous songs, probably Folsom Prison Blues. But like I said, this is a good choice by Tom. For a lot of other reasons, you kind of hear there's this sort of melancholy. A lot of these songs have this, and it goes back to Hank, I think, is this kind of, I'm doing this, but it's not necessarily so great that there's this kind of bad feeling about it. But Folsom Prison Blues, Johnny Cash famously, obviously, played at several prisons, advocated prison reform, and prisoners tended to love it when Johnny Cash would show up. And so now I'm going to get it to another influence, and then we're really going to start to hit the rebel country guys. And I think that this guy's kind of an outlaw in his own right, but he's an influence who was sort of obscure during his lifetime, even though he only really died sort of recently. And he was referenced by many of these guys, and I'm going to get to actually later a hit that is a cover of one of his songs. But I like this. This is Townes Van Zandt is the man in question, and it shows you how close to folk music this was, and gives you a different kind of angle on the trajectory of this outlaw country and where its roots are. So here's basically a folk song, and it's a theme that was very common for several folk singers, talking about coal mining, actually. And this is a great song because it shows you how dangerous the labor was, which a lot of folk songs were inherently political. And we'll get to that a little bit. Some of these outlaw country themes, really, it might sound like advocation of a sort of dangerous lifestyle, but on some levels, this becomes pretty political. And here's a perfect example of that. And this is Townes Van Zandt. Like I said, at this time, wasn't really famous, even though he was really, really productive. But eventually gets kind of the respect that he deserves, and he has a tragic end. We'll come back to that in a second. But just listen how close this was to folk music for one of the more influential players in this outlaw country history.
Won't you lend your lungs to me? Mine are collapsing. Plant my feet and bitterly breathe up the time that's passed. Breath I'll take and breath I'll give. Pray the day's not poised. Stand among the ones that live in lonely indecision. Fingers walk the darkness down, mind is on the midnight. Gather up the gold you found, you fool, it's only moonlight. And if you stop to take it home, your hands will turn to butter. Better leave this dream alone, try to find another. Salvation sat and crossed herself and called the devil partner. Wisdom burned upon a shelf, who'll kill the raging cancer. Seal the river at its mouth, take the water prisoner. Fill the sky with screams and cries, bathe in fiery answers. Was an only son, and love is only concept. But strangers cry in foreign tongues and dirty up the doorstep. And I for one and you for two ain't got the time for outside. Keep your injured looks to you, we'll tell the world that we tried.
All right, so that's Townes Van Zandt, and what I love about this song is there's a couple things. I'm going to make this argument as a sort of I get to the end. I'm going to try and wrap up with this, but I think that the legacy of some of these guys has been kind of taken away from them. So you hear that song. I mean, this is a song about one environmentalism, right? He is arguing against dams and coal mining. It's against work, this kind of work. So we have this sort of idea that country music becomes this thing for hardcore right-wing Republican rednecks, and that's just not true. Even for the outlaw country guys, even when some of them later sort of advocate that, the roots are definitely not there. So you get Townes Van Zandt. I mean, this guy is far on the left, and he links up to another couple of people who he was a big influence on, and who were wildly influential in their own right. And another one is Willie Nelson, right? So also a guy who's a big-time advocate for the legalization of marijuana. That a lot of these guys are on the left, and that song I should mention is 1969. So this is kind of right when outlaw country is about to take off, and even though he was sort of obscure at that time, he becomes really influential for some other people. And the man himself, he had rejected his roots. He was the descendant of prominent Texans from the original founding of the Republic of Texas, and he is the son of a really rich oil man, and he sort of gives up his roots. And he was around until the 1990s, and it's sort of a tragic story, but interesting nonetheless. He has a hip injury, and as he had always done for most of his life, he refused to go to the hospital, and it laid him up. So 8 days later, he finally decides to go to the hospital, and he was a raging alcoholic by this point, and the doctors said that detox would probably kill him. So it was really difficult to treat his pain because the guy was so boozed up all the time. They were trying to slowly wean him off alcohol. He starts having DTs when he's on the way home from the hospital, and so some of his friends give him some drinks of vodka to calm him down. He seems like he's in a good mood that night. He drinks a little bit more, takes some pain medication, and he sort of woke up dead, as it were. That's what killed him. A really influential, really interesting figure in his own right. I could do an episode on him, but he also links to a trend that we see throughout, probably more towards the end of the 70s and into the 80s. But I'm going to take, like I said, for people just tuning in, my long-distance guest, Tom Bowers, I'm going to take his advice. I'm going to bring Willie Nelson, Townes Van Zandt, and Merle Haggard all together all at once here from a supergroup song here, the Highwaymen, who cover one of his songs, and they actually are, and this is from 1985, the cover, and this ends up getting a lot of people to go back and find out who Townes Van Zandt is. So here's one of the big groups. It's Willie Nelson, Merle Haggard, Johnny Cash, and Chris Christopherson, which sounds like a lot of big heads to have in the same room by 1985. But their first album especially, they had produced 3 hits off of it, and it really holds together really well. And this is Willie and Merle are doing most of the singing duties on this particular track, but they make a hit out of Van Zandt's story song. And like most folk songs, here's this story song song. It's from 1985, and you can definitely tell the recording is advanced, but just to show you his influence. So we got really some big names here: Willie Merle, Johnny Cash, and Chris Christopherson playing their tribute to Townes Van Zandt with his song Poncho and Lefty.
Living on the road, my friend, was gonna keep you free and clean. And now you wear your skin like iron, and your breath is hard as kerosene. You weren't your mama's only boy, but her favorite one, it seemed. She began to cry when you said goodbye. Sank into your dream. Pancho was a bandit boy. His horse was fast as polished steel. He wore his gun outside his pants for all the honest world to feel. Well, Pancho met his match, you know, on the deserts down in Mexico. Nobody heard his dying word. Oh, but that's the way it goes. All the federales say they could have had him any day. They only let him slip away. Out of kindness, I suppose. He can't sing the blues all night long like he used to. The dust of Pancho bit down south ended up and left his mouth. The day they laid poor Pancho low, Lefty split for Ohio, where he got the bread to go. Nobody knows. All the federales say they could have had him any day. We only let him slip away. Out of kindness, I suppose.
Hotel. The desert's quiet, Cleveland's cold, and so the story ends, we're told. I don't need your prayers, it's true, to save a few for Lefty too. He only did what he had to do, and now he's growing old.
right, so there's our first taste of the supergroup there, but showing the reference, Merle and Willie, really important in their own right, and so I picked that song there, Tom's advice, because we can take care of all three of those all at once. But you hear the influence coming from sort of a real kind of a folk sort of performer in his own right. So just showing you the varied roots of this kind of country. But after the 1970s, this is where you really start to see the Outlaws. And part of the thing that they're doing is referencing their own past. So you start to hear a lot of songs referencing all of the heroes and the legends and their fellow performers, and then all of the things that made them outlaws, the things that they were rejecting, the problems that they saw, and then also what it is to be an outlaw. So the songs start to sort of say, this is what outlaws are, here are heroes, this is why we're outlaws, because we don't like this. And so you get a lot of this throughout the 70s, and Waylon Jennings is one of the more popular artists from the era. Like I said earlier, he was actually a roommate of Johnny Cash for a while, addicted to alcohol, pills, and then later notoriously cocaine. He eventually died from complications from diabetes in 2002. He's really successful and became pretty popular. He's the voice on the Dukes of Hazzard, the narrator. So like many others, he was had crossover success on TV and film in his time. And now we're going to play this song from 1979, and this is great. I think this really shows you something about what the Outlaws were doing, referencing a certain kind of past that they were clinging to in order to reject some of the things that they saw as wrong with what was happening at their current or their contemporary time, right? So the things that they were fed up with, they were kind of hearkening back to this other kind of past. And this is a great song, Are You Sure Hank Done It This Way? And what is he talking about? Well, we'll listen to the tune here, right? But referencing Hank Williams as one of the heroes, and sort of comparing Hank's day to his day and some of the problems that he had with it. So here's Waylon Jennings, Are You Sure Hank Done It This Way, from 1979.
It's the same old tune, fiddle and guitar. Where do we take it from here? Rhinestone suits and new shiny cars. It's been the same way for years. We need a change. Somebody told me when I came to Nashville, son, you finally got it made. Old Hank made it here. We're all sure that you will, but I don't think Hank done it this way. No, I don't think Hank done it this way. Look at it. 10 years on the road, making one-night stands, speeding my young life away. Tell me one more time, just so I'll understand. Are you sure Hank done it this way? Did old Hank really do it this way? Thought I've seen the world with a five-piece band, looking at the backside of me, singing my songs and one of his now and then. But I don't think Hank done 'em this way. No, I don't think Hank done 'em this way. Take it on.
So there we go with Waylon Jennings. Are you sure Hank done it this way? And like I said, he's referencing, and you hear this in the beginning, right? I came to Nashville. Hank made it here. If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. It's kind of rejecting the Nashville sound. And Waylon also, he has a super group of his own design with Willie Nelson. So again, you see all of these connections between all these different performers, and also his wife, one of the female rebel country performers, Jessie Coulter. And here's a song from their album. Let me take a look at Tom's notes here. Wanted, the Outlaws. So you've got Jessie Coulter, Willie on a few of these songs, but here's Waylon and Jessie Coulter were married, I should add here. Here they are playing an Elvis song, a song that Elvis actually made popular. He didn't write this song, Suspicious Minds, in their own supergroup album. So here's a song from 1976, Waylon and Jessie Coulter, Suspicious Minds.
Caught in the trap, I can't walk out because I love you too much, baby.
Why can't you see what you're doing to me? When you don't believe a word I'm saying.
Suspicious minds. We can't build our dreams on suspicious minds. I saw an old friend I know. I stopped to say hello, but I could still see suspicion in your eyes.
Ask me where I've been. You can't see the tears are real. I'm crying.
We can't go on together with suspicious minds. We can't build our dreams on suspicious minds.
All right, so there's Waylon and Jesse, and we'll actually hear about them in a song coming up in a minute here. This is a really interesting, an interesting way to think about this pair, because a lot of this is kind of one of the points I want to make towards the end. A lot of this being an outlaw, a lot of this sort of has to do with kind of male-oriented things. It's about being tough, violent, drinking, drugs, and really we're talking about a time when women were not really expected to be doing this sort of thing. You could maybe even say that carries through to today. But we have this group playing, so it's sort of harder for women to get in, and Jesse really kind of had to get in through Waylon. But there is Suspicious Minds, and we're gonna try and carry that point through a little bit later. I'm gonna go to another one of these more obscure influences, and that right there, really Elvis coming sort of close to his disco period. So you can kind of see how music was changing in the 60s and 70s, and how much these guys are really, as much as there's an influence from Hank there, I mean, there's an Elvis song, and this song is wildly popular on the country music charts to just kind of show you. And this is the same time as Rhinestone Cowboy, and as sort of what's popular in country, what makes these guys outlaws, the things that they're rebelling against are really getting close to disco, rock and roll, all sorts of different influences in there. I'm going to play this guy, like I said, another sort of an obscure person who comes from kind of a different tradition we don't really think of when we think of country music, and this is Graham Parsons. And really, he's one of the greatest outlaws for several reasons. He's from the Byrds, actually, and he ends up starting a band, the Flying Burrito Brothers, with Roger McGuinn, and we're going to actually hear that song about. Like I said, a lot of these songs become self-referential, so they start listing the heroes, and he's one who's listed several times, and he's really sort of eccentric, to say the least. But he shows you some of the deeper influences, like folk that we've sort of heard from Van Zandt, but also psychedelic music, and even like a psychedelic aesthetic. What he would do is he would go to Joshua Tree, California, out into the desert, and he would take a bunch of LSD, he would take mushrooms, and he would go out into the desert and search for UFOs, which was one of his hobbies. This is Graham Parsons, and he died at age 26. He OD'd from morphine and alcohol, a lethal mixture of morphine and alcohol. And according to his wishes, his friends actually stole his body and casket, and they brought it to Joshua Tree, California. He wasn't allowed to be buried there, so they stole his casket and brought it. And this is what Parsons wanted, and he had sort of was one of those guys who kind of assumed he was going to die early, right? He's 26 years old when he died, and he had already left funeral wishes for his friends. But they stole his body, stole the casket, brought it out to Joshua Tree, poured 5 gallons of gasoline on it, and lit it up in a fireball. And police were chasing them, and they got away. And one of the quotes is right: a rare moment of sobriety helped them to escape with this group that Graham Parsons was running with. And there's no law against stealing a dead body in California at the time, so they were fined for stealing the casket. But they weren't fined for leaving 35 pounds of ashes in the desert. But also, you can hear this kind of, you'll hear the Hank-like lyrics here. And this is a guy who really strays from rock and roll to psychedelic to folk to country, but he very much is playing in Hank Williams' vocal tradition, and he was really noted for being a songwriter more than a performer, although he was a really good piano player. But he wrote a lot of songs for the Byrds and for the Flying Burrito Brothers. But here, just take a listen to the lyrics, and you can kind of hear the affinity to the Hank Williams style of lyrics.
Young man silver string guitar, and he played to people everywhere. Some say he was a star.
But he was just a country boy, his simple songs confess, and the music he had in him, so very few possess. In my hour of darkness, in my time of need, oh Lord, grant me vision, oh Lord, grant me speed. Then there was an old man, kind and wise with age, and he read me just like a book, and he never missed a page. And I loved him like my father, and I loved him like my friend, and I knew his time could shortly come, but I did not know just when. In my hour of darkness, in my time of need, oh Lord, grant me vision, oh Lord, grant me speed, oh Lord, grant me vision, oh Lord, grant me speed.
All right, so there's a beautiful song from Graham Parsons, and you hear some of those common themes, this kind of religious theme that has been there through Hank Williams, through Johnny Cash. That's sort of one of the other influences that gets obscured, is that all these people, Willie, many of them actually dabbled in gospel music as well. But you hear In My Hour of Darkness, a few things are impressive about him. As I said, he died when he was 26. This is his third band, his solo career here. That's 1974, that song, In My Hour of Darkness. And he was influence on the most outlaw of outlaw country singers, David Allan Coe, and as Tom put it on his notes, the greatest outlaw. Just that simple. I'm going to play a song here, and this is again part of that self-referential tradition here, and you start to see this as we go out now. Almost all these songs are actually directly referencing other performers and outlaw country itself. Here's a 1977 song from David Allan Coe called Willie, Waylon and Me, talking about Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, and himself, and how they sort of are outlaw country. But listen to him mention the Flying Burrito Brothers, the Graham Parsons reference there. And so you can sort of see a guy who probably sounds to most people a lot more hardcore and a lot more, you could just say criminal maybe, than a Graham Parsons song like In My Hour of Darkness. We'll just listen to how he gives him the nod here. So as I said, Willie, Waylon and Me from 1977, David Allan Coe.
I heard the burritos out in California could fly higher than the birds. Roger McGuinn had a 12-string guitar. It was like nothing I'd ever heard. And the eagles flew in from the west coast. Like the birds, they were trying to be free. While in Texas, the tongue turned to outlaws like Willie and Waylon and me. Hey. Well, they say Texas music's in the make, and we've been making music that is free. Doing one-night stands, playing with our bands, Willie, Waylon and me, oh mad dog. say the Beatles were just the beginning of everything music could be. Just like the Stones, I was rolling along like a ship lost out on the sea. And Joplin would die for the future, and Dylan would write poetry. And in Texas, the talk turned to outlaws like Willie and Waylon and me. Hey, my name is David Allen Coe, and I'm from Dallas, Texas. They say Texas music's in the make, and we've been making music that is free, doing one-night stands, playing with our bands, Willie, Waylon, and me. Big Jim. The burritos out in California could fly higher than the birds. Roger McGuinn had a 12-string guitar. It was like nothing I ever heard. And the eagles flew in from the west coast. Like the birds, they were trying to be free. While in Texas, the talk turned outlaws like Willie and Waylon and me.
So there is David Allen Coe, and you hear all of the references, right? So he says, the burritos fly higher than the birds, the reference to Graham Parsons, the Eagles, he mentions the Beatles, the Stones, Janis Joplin, Bob Dylan, but he says that the talk turns to outlaws in Texas, like Willie, Waylon, and me, all Texas performers who were doing this, rejecting the sound that they heard in Nashville. So really, David Allen Coe places himself in a tradition that we might not really think of, and there's no mention of Hank Williams there, right? In a different kind of a context than we maybe think when we think of outlaw country. I'm going to play another song from David Allen Coe before we talk about him. That was 1977, Willie, Waylon, and me. I'm going to play a 1976 song here, and this is where he's really outlining what it means to be the outlaw. You get a little taste of that in that song that we just played, but there he's really kind of talking about the music, and he's really talking about the industry and their history, which is great because a lot of these guys are really self-referential like that. And here we go with Long-Haired Redneck, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit about David Allen Coe himself.
Country DJs knows that I'm an outlaw. They'd never come to see me in this dive, where bikers stare at cowboys who are laughing at the hippies who are praying they'll get out of here alive. Loudmouth in the corners getting to me, talking about my earrings and my hair. I guess he ain't read the signs that say I've been to prison. Someone ought to warn him before I knock him off his chair, 'cause my long hair just can't cover up my redneck. I've won every fight I've ever fought, and I don't need some turkey telling me that I ain't country, saying I ain't worth a damn dog ticket that he bought. 'Cause I can sing all them songs about Texas, and I still do all the sad ones that I know. They tell me I look like Merle Haggard and sound a lot like David Allen Coe. And the barmaid in the last town that we played in knew the words to every song I'd wrote. She said Jimmy Rabbit turned her on to my last album just about the time the jukebox broke. Yeah, Johnny Cash helped me get out of prison, long before Rodriguez stole that goat. I've been the rhinestone cowboy for so long I can't remember. And I can do you every song Hank Williams ever wrote. And I can sing all them songs about Texas. And I still do all the sad ones that I know. I can't help it, I look like Merle Haggard. And I sound a lot like David Allan Coe. But the country DJs all think I'm an outlaw. And they'd never come to see me in this dive, where bikers stare at cowboys who are laughing at the hippies who are praying they'll get out of here alive. The loudmouth in the corner's getting to me, talking about my earrings and my hair.
Really, David Allan Coe says it perfectly there, right? What is he saying in that song? He's sort of dissociating himself with rednecks and saying that, you know, country can't understand him because of this long hair and the earrings. So really a guy that a lot of people have just taken out of hand as a racist and a bigot and sort of a bad man is really putting himself kind of on the side of the hippies in that song. And then you hear the reference to Hank Williams and what it is to be an outlaw and who he sounds like and who he looks like. Again, and many of his songs are like this, extremely self-referential. And he really comes out of like a singer-songwriter tradition, a fascinating figure. So he's probably one of the favorite, one of the favorite Texas outlaws, and in all of his songs he talks about his fellow Texas outlaws, and really it's in that song there he's kind of setting it up as a different genre that country doesn't understand him. And like I said, his importance, he probably gave the name outlaw country because of his motorcycle gang, the Outlaws. And for his personal life, he went to reform school at age 9, was basically in prison or some kind of correctional institution for the next 20 years of his life. He ended up killing a man in prison who came on to him, and he was accused of racism for a song that is tough to defend, Nigger Fucker. In the 80s, he has this song, but he saw it as a joke, and he defended it by saying, anybody who knows me and listens to my album wouldn't think that I'm a racist. He actually had a black drummer in his band. He had several black bandmates, and when he was in prison, one of the reasons that he was treated poorly, and one of his biggest problems with prison, is that white prisoners would not associate with him, or they would try to attack him, or they just were not on his side because he would hang out with black inmates and he had black friends in prison, which actually got him in trouble there. So many interesting stories about this guy. So the IRS takes his home that he had in the Keys, in the Florida Keys, and so he ended up going and living in a cave in Tennessee for several months. He ends up in the 80s having sort of crossover success with kind of more of a rock and roll type sound, and for the hardcore fans out there, eventually he ends up recording an album with Dimebag Darrell and Vinnie Paul, the guitar player and drummer from Pantera, which is going to lead us to an interesting link when we get into the 90s and 2000s again, and that album came out in the 2000s. That this guy is really, no matter what the audience thinks of him later on in his life, he kind of dissociates himself from a lot of redneck culture, and he's still kicking right now. He's still on tour occasionally, and I'll go back to somebody else before we return to that kind of hardcore legacy that he leaves. When you get to mixing Pantera and David Allan Coe, we'll take a step through some of the people who carried us through the 80s. So Hank Williams, this is keeping Hank Williams' bloodline alive. He's survived by Hank Jr., his son, and who started out by singing his dad's songs shortly after he passed away. When he was 8 years old, he was on TV singing his songs, and for most of the early part of the 70s, he was pigeonholed as a Hank Williams clone. Like his dad in the 70s, he starts getting hooked on drugs and alcohol, which plague him for a lot of the rest of his life. But he starts to emerge with his own kind of sound when you get to the late 70s, and he has a couple really successful records then. And in the 80s, one of the songs that we all have probably heard is All My Rowdy Friends Are Coming Over Tonight, because it was the song for Monday Night Football for years and years and years and years. But he also has this, he's very much into the self-referential sort of idea that I'm trying to put forward here. He sings about his dad all the time. Like I said, we've all heard the song All My Rowdy Friends Are Coming Over, but here's the song that he wrote in 1981, and this is coming shortly after the 70s. Right? A lot of these songs that have been playing have been coming from 75, 76, 78, 79 here. 1981, All My Rowdy Friends Have Settled Down, and this is basically his sort of idea about how the outlaws are really no longer outlaws anymore. And he came up with these guys, so these are his friends, and he knows them, and he is familiar with them, and has performed with them and sang with them. So this is sort of like a joking around, but you really hear what he thinks about what happened to the outlaws. And this is a problem when you create a group of people and set them up as outlaws. Well, what happens when they settle down? And here's what Hank thinks happens when they settle down.
Everybody just wants to go back home. I myself have seen my wilder days, and I have seen my name at the top of the page. But I need to find a friend just to run around. Nobody wants to get high on the town. And all my rowdy friends have settled down. And I think I know what my father meant when he sang about a lost highway. And old George Jones, I'm glad to see, is finally getting straight. Jesse more these days, and nobody wants to get drunk and get loud. And all my rowdy friends have settled down.
So we got Hank Williams Jr. there, referencing a lot of his buddies and a lot of his own kind of behavior. What does it mean to be an outlaw? Getting drunk and getting high and getting stoned. And he talks about sort of all of the guys that we've been talking about settling down in the 1980s. Hank Jr. still around, active, still playing music, released an album in the 2000s, and the trend didn't necessarily die, even though Hank is sort of setting it up as it's all over. Just get something sounding much different, and that's from the early 80s. Here's the song, Steve Earle. A lot of us are familiar with Copperhead Road. I'm going to give you a different song here on Tom's Advice, Hardcore Troubadour, that I think also, this is him making a connection, but in a much different way. So this song sounds a lot different than a lot of the ones that we've been listening to, but it's definitely still coming out of the same tradition. So here's Steve Earle playing Hardcore Troubadour. So there we have Steve Earle, and that's from 1987, his Copperhead Road album. Now this is where you kind of get almost a recycling of the same problems that the original Outlaws were kind of rebelling against. Steve Earle is in this sort of transitional zone. He's carrying that tradition, but it also gets picked up in the 90s, and you get a kind of new kind of country. You could think of Garth Brooks and George Strait and all sorts of guys like that who actually kind of pick up on that Steve Earle sort of sound and end up, we end up where we are today with contemporary pop country music, where really you can hardly tell the difference between pop singers like Jessica Simpson's an example. You can hardly tell the difference between country and pop. So he's like one of the last guys who really is on that countryside, but he ends up influencing a lot of the people who cause a sort of another reaction. And here's a guy who's really interesting in his own right and keeps us alive and brings us, as I said, we can close out on this guy who connects us all the way back to Hank Williams 3, who starts out as a punk. And I really like, I I think that he fits this really well because he shows us a bunch of connections that you maybe wouldn't think of when you think of outlaw country, but that are certainly there. So he was in his own punk metal band, Ass Jack. He drummed for a southern rock band called Arson Anthem, and he played bass with the Pantera singer Phil Anselmo's solo effort Superjoint Ritual, or his other band after Pantera, Superjoint Ritual. And he connects directly to the Outlaws because they rejected this. He was rejecting this kind of pop country, and I'm going to play a song that is all about rejecting what he sees as wrong with pop country in 2005, the song that I'm going to play. So this is sort of like what everybody was doing in the 70s, saying that they're sick of the overproduced Nashville sound, and so they do their own thing. And it's really this DIY, do-it-yourself aesthetic of punk rock that Hank brings to country music. And like I said, he's really skirts metal and hard rock, southern rock, country. He covers a lot of territory, and he also has a different idea about recording, about the overproduced nature of music. So he ends up recording the song that I'm going to play. It's off the album Straight to Hell, and he ends up recording it on a $400 mixing board in a wooden room in his friend's house. And he got into some disputes with this record label because his music seemed too controversial to market as country, which really upset Hank because he said the stuff that was marketed as country wasn't country and what he was playing was country. So he ends up settling this dispute after this long battle with Curb Records, his label, and he's the first country performer to have a parental label on one version of his album that's sold in the independent stores, and then the clean version that you'll find, a lot of hip-hop groups do this. You find the clean version in Walmart and Kmart and stuff like that. It's the first this is the first country album that has the clean version and the parental advisory version. And I'm actually going to play a song that was dropped from the clean version. So if you buy this CD at Walmart, you won't get this song. This is Hank 3, The Dick and Dixie from 2005. And you listen to these lyrics, I think this perfectly sums it up. And I'll play us one or two more songs maybe after this if we have time, and I'll sum up. But this song really sums this up. Straight return to what the Outlaws were doing originally, rejecting what they saw as no longer country music anymore and calling it their own thing. And so here's Hank doing a little bit of that, and this is 2005, so it really kind of brings us full circle. And what a convenient character to keep Hank's bloodline alive to get us to close off. So here's Dick and Dixie.
Country really
All right, so there we have Hank 3, really summing it up nice there. The exact same thing that the Outlaws were saying, and he references it too. What happened to all the Outlaws? It's overproduced, it's a commercial sound, people are kissing ass on Music Row, really doing the same thing that a lot of the guys who came before him, and it's Hank Williams 3 connecting him back all the way to the roots. And true to his punk roots, he advocated that people buy, this is because of a record deal that his stuff ends up getting a clean version in Walmart. He doesn't really have much to do with that. And so what does he do? Tell everybody, buy my record from an independent store or don't buy it at all. Just whatever you do, don't buy the clean version. Leave that thing on the shelf at Walmart. So there you have it, a round trip through outlaw country courtesy of my long distance guest, Tom Bowers. So what does it take to make a genre? Well, you need to have a history. So these guys have Jimmy Rogers, but a lot of them look back to Hank Williams to sort of give themselves a place in time. You need a myth, the hard living, the obsessed with death, drugs, and alcohol, challenging the status quo. And a lot of these guys live it out, and you also need some legends, Johnny Cash, Waylon Jennings, Merle Haggard, Willie Nelson, all of these guys. What are some of the problems? Well, a lot of these guys die trying to fill the role. So there's a problem when you have an image to live up to. And one of the problems is that the roots get obscured. So really, you don't think of folk, you don't think of blues, you certainly don't think of like psychedelic rock and roll or gospel, really, when you're thinking of country music, even though all those influences are there. And really what happened, I think, to this is my sort of argument of the day. I think that the audience added their own myths. So this kind of music gets associated with racism, rednecks, hicks, Republican politics, all this sort of stuff. But a lot of these guys were hardcore lefties. They were druggies. They wanted prison reform. They hated politics. They were steeped in black music traditions, and they were proud of that and advocated it. So a lot of these guys were really, David Allan Coe was the most hardcore guy of them all, was really criticizing redneck culture. And so there you have it for Outlaw Country. I want to thank Tom Bowers for the list there. He provided us with the music. I also want to plug my friend Jacob's show. You can hear him with the AHGS History Hour on Tuesday night at 7 p.m. So please tune in for that. I think I'll eventually be a guest on there. He's having great guests and great conversation. So please tune into that. I'd ask you to come back and listen again to my show, which is moved now to 3:30 on Saturday. As always, you can find both my and Jacob's shows in the archives. I believe that we're going to go into a dead hour, and then Spider Mike is going to come back on at 6 o'clock, I believe. I also, as always, want to plug River West Film and Video, the coolest store in town, if you ask me. Come on down and visit Zav, check out the radio station, get your videos here. It's a great deal, and there are tons of cool movies here. And you can walk by the camera, and you can, I'll make you famous if you just walk by the radio show there. So, as I said, I think we're going into a dead hour. I'm going to put on one song. I don't want to give away too much because I believe we're going to talk about rockabilly next week with my guest Rich. So if you're interested, tune into that. So I don't want to give away too much there, but I'm going to play a really off-the-wall song that we probably don't think of at all when we think of country music, but is definitely influenced by that sound. So I'm going to end with a Meat Puppet song from 1984 here, Lost. So thank you for tuning in, and hopefully you will hear me next week.
Lost on the freeway again, walking the breezeways again, thinking of something, my friend. I grow tired of living Nixon's mess, walking the breezeways again. I know there'll come a day when you say that you don't know me. I know there'll come a time when there's nothing anybody owes me anymore.